Number 9. Fernando Monera. In May of 2021, a woman was fatally stabbed at her apartment in Harlem, New York City, by her ex-boyfriend. 26-year-old Fernando Monera had met his on- and off-girlfriend, Alanya Hardy, aged 27, after she'd moved into the same apartment complex. They began dating shortly thereafter, but had a toxic relationship that led to several breakups and reconciliations. Friends, neighbors, and family spoke about how Monera was jealous, aggressive, and controlling towards Hardy, and they encouraged her to leave the relationship. The woman was ultimately granted a restraining order after Monera broke into her apartment on the top floor and aggressively held her captive in February of 2021. She eventually managed to escape and call the police, and Monera trashed her apartment in anger. Despite the restraining order, Monera continued living in his ground floor apartment in the same complex. A few months later, on May the 19th, Monera tried to break into Hardy's apartment yet again. She called the police asking for help, but the man left before officers arrived at her apartment. Monera subsequently returned and gained access to her home through the fire escape. He attacked Hardy, stabbing her multiple times. She put up a fight and inflicted injuries to Monera's chest and neck that left him in critical condition. The woman was rushed to the hospital where she succumbed to her knife wounds. Monera recovered and was subsequently charged with murder, burglary, and criminal contempt. Number 8. Samantha Stansifer. On June the 14th of 2015, a woman by the name of Samantha Stansifer brutally stabbed her boyfriend after they'd returned home from a party in Henrietta, Oklahoma. 20-year-old Stansifer had a toxic 3-year on- and off relationship with her boyfriend Anthony Hall, age 23. Stansifer had moved into Hall's house for a while, and despite being broken up the night of the party, they were still living together. While at the party, Stansifer became upset after seeing text messages on Hall's phone from another woman. After the pair had returned to Hall's home, Stansifer noticed even more texts on the man's phone from the same woman. It was at that point that Stansifer went to the kitchen for a drink. She returned to the bedroom with 2 knives and stabbed Hall multiple times before calling the police to report the incident. Officers arrived at the scene to find the man dead and Stansifer covered in his blood as she admitted to killing him. She was arrested and charged with murder, leading to a conviction in April of 2016 and a consequent sentence of life in prison without parole. Number 7. Michael Marapace. On March the 13th of 2019, a man murdered his ex-girlfriend in her Rhode Island home after a tense 2-year-long relationship. 40-year-old Michael Marapace, who had been in and out of jail for the majority of his life, killed Lauren Iser after his most recent release. While Marapace's longtime friend insisted that he wasn't a violent person, Iser's family members had a completely different take on the situation, stating that they had a hostile relationship riddled with warning signs. The day before her murder, 29-year-old Iser had called the police after Marapace had showed up to her home. He'd reportedly banged on the windows, threatening to kill her, and driven in circles around her neighborhood. Marapace had even knocked on her neighbors' doors, asking them if Iser was dating anybody else. Once the police arrived, the woman explained that she had a restraining order against her ex. However, when police tried to confirm her report, they found that the restraining order was actually put in place against her by Marapace. For that reason, officers claimed they were unable to do anything and left. In their absence, Marapace broke into Iser's home, killed her, and later confessed the murder to a friend. The latter alerted the police, who found the victim dead in her bedroom. Marapace was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. As of the latest available information, he was being held without bail as he awaited trial. Number 6. Thomas Nutt. Dawn Walker was killed by her new husband, a man by the name of Thomas Nutt, on their wedding night on October the 27th of 2021. There were signs of trouble before they'd even gotten married, and Nutt had served time in prison for assaulting Walker roughly a year before their wedding. Friends and family had warned the woman to leave the relationship because he was dangerous. Neighbors constantly heard Nutt yelling at Walker and noticed that he was possessive and controlling of her. After the wedding, Nutt claimed to have taken Walker on a honeymoon trip to Skegness, England. Upon their supposed return, Walker didn't show up to a meeting she'd previously planned with her daughter, who couldn't get a hold of her. When her daughter asked Nutt where she was, he reportedly acted as though he had no idea and even helped her look for Walker. When she didn't turn up, they reported her missing, and Nutt had tried to make it sound as though Walker was mentally ill and battling a drinking problem. In reality, he'd killed her just hours after their wedding and had subsequently broken her legs to have her fit inside a suitcase that he later dumped in a field near their home. On August 19th of 2022, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. Number 5. Hannah Sindri. In the early hours of January the 1st of 2021, mother of two Hannah Sindri stabbed her boyfriend at her Essex apartment in England. 24-year-old Sindri was hosting a New Year's Eve party when her boyfriend, Paul Fletcher, took her phone after being suspicious of her cheating on him. An argument broke out that culminated with Sindri grabbing a kitchen knife and stabbing 31-year-old Fletcher in the chest, killing him at the scene. Witnesses who were present at the party told police that they'd seen Sindri holding the knife and aggressively waving it at Fletcher before stabbing him. Sindri initially tried to pin the murder on her friend, Kelly Blackwell, who was later found not guilty. Sindri and Fletcher's friends told the authorities that they'd argued regularly and that the disputes sometimes turned into violence. In January of 2022, Sindri was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 14 years and 5 months before being eligible for parole. Number 4. Mark Barrett. On August 15th of 2021, a mother was found dead at her home in Leeds, England, by her son in the aftermath of an argument with her husband. Eileen Barrett and her husband Mark Barrett, both in their 50s, were known for having a toxic relationship. Mark was described as a jealous and controlling partner. He'd at one point secretly placed a tracking device in Eileen's purse and would follow her any time she left the house. Eileen had tried to leave the marriage numerous times over the years, but Mark had manipulated her into staying by threatening to take his own life. Eileen finally decided to leave on the night of August 14th of 2021, and when Mark realized he couldn't manipulate her into staying, he turned to violence. He hit her twice with a hammer and strangled her, leaving her body on the floor of their home before fleeing to Scotland. The police launched a nationwide manhunt and were able to track him down 5 days later in Elgin, where he was arrested. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years served. Number 3. Tafari Walton. In March of 2019, a young mother from Australia was fatally stabbed by her partner, who had a history of violence involving knives. 22-year-old Tafari Walton was high on cocaine when he tied up his girlfriend, Gabriella Thompson, and stabbed her 16 times. Walton had called several of 27-year-old Thompson's friends on the night of the murder. They became concerned for her safety and alerted the authorities. One of the woman's closest friends, Emma Russell, told law enforcement that Walton had a history of being physically violent towards Thompson. After the murder, Walton fled the scene and a day-long manhunt ensued. He was found at Lake Macquarie, New South Wales, where police tried to subdue him with pepper spray. When that failed and Walton charged at an officer with a knife, he was fatally shot. Today's topic was requested by River Parish. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Abdul Jabbar Mahmood. A man was charged with the fatal stabbing of his ex-girlfriend in Ontario, Canada, on February the 9th of 2020. Brittany Newman, aged 25, was in a long-term relationship with 27-year-old Abdul Jabbar Mahmood, and the pair had 2 young children together. Their troubled relationship had caused Newman to seek help multiple times over the years, and even resulted in her staying in a shelter for a short period of time to get away from Mahmood. At the time of her murder, they'd been broken up for 2 years, and she had been living in her own apartment with their children. The man burst into her home and attacked her with a knife before calling the police. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they found Newman clinging to life after having suffered multiple stab wounds. The authorities arrested Mahmood at the scene, and a short time later, Newman died as a result of her injuries. Mahmood was charged with second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 18 years. Number 1. Tracy Andrews. On December the 1st of 1996, aspiring model Tracy Andrews tearfully described to law enforcement the murder of her fiancé, 25-year-old Lee Harvey, in Worcestershire, UK, by an unknown male assailant. In reality, 27-year-old Andrews herself had stabbed Harvey 42 times with a pocket knife and sliced his throat in the middle of the night on a country lane near their home, where she abandoned him to die of his injuries. She went on to lie about what had happened, stating that a fat man with staring eyes had killed him following a road rage incident. After they'd left a nearby pub, Andrews appeared in court with a black eye, stating that she'd been punched in the face during the attack as she tried to help Harvey. However, an analysis by forensic psychologist Kerry Danes revealed that Andrews was lying, and the ensuing investigation proved that her story didn't add up. The model became the primary suspect in her husband's killing and was arrested a few days later. In 1997, she was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 14 years. 2 years into her sentence, she admitted to killing Harvey in an act of self-defense. Andrews was released after serving her sentence and eventually got engaged to another man. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be forced into a toxic relationship for the next 5 years, or be forced to prepare, cook, and eat your own pufferfish? Let us know in the comments section below.